I found that there's not a lot of videos that really show you how to do it. It's really not until I actually did it that I really learned how to do it. You can only watch so many videos before you just have to try it. But I'm really hoping that this video really does show you every step of the way how to do it to maximize your success. So we're going to go through everything today. Hi everyone, so this is a follow-up video that I'm going to do about the mealworm farming. I'm now 2.5 years or so, or maybe even close to 3 years into farming them. This is a follow-up to really show you what I'm doing now as opposed to what I was doing then. I've made changes and also correcting major mistakes that I made. So in this video, I'm going to go through exactly how I look after the farm, sort of month to month. We'll also do, or I'll show you how I sift the beetles out to give them a new bin, as well as sifting the frass, and just how I keep them sort of throughout the month, because we sift them and sift the beetles once a month, and then there's the feeding throughout the month and so on. So the first year was really about setting up and getting the farm going, as well as making the mistakes. And the second year has been about correcting those mistakes, strengthening the farm, and now I'm in a stage where I'm trying to maintain a strong mealworm farm so that we maintain the life cycle, we feed the chickens, and we produce as much frass as we can to fertilize the garden and sell at markets. So there was a few major mistakes that I made in that first year. The first one was, once I started getting a monthly supply of mealworms, I prioritized feeding the chickens over maintaining the colony.
Chickens go crazy for this stuff.
And what that eventually did was I didn't have enough mealworms to become pupa, to become beetles, to become eggs and more mealworms, slowing the production down, leading to less mealworms as such. The second major mistake I made was I put them outside for a while, and what that did was it was either too hot or too cold, either overheating the mealworms leading to some die-offs, or it was too cold leading to a slowing of the growth rate. The third mistake I made in that process was covering them with a sheet, it was actually a blanket, to try and keep them warm in the cooler days or cooler weather, as well as to sort of hide some of the smell that was coming from it. But that was actually a vicious cycle, because the covering of them actually increased the smell, and it also blocked off some oxygen supply to the farm. It was a big mistake. So those three major mistakes just really set me back. I reckon it's set me back a good nearly 6 to 12 months, because once you only have a handful of beetles, then you only have a handful of eggs, and it takes a good 4 or 5 months for that to cycle through the farm. After making those mistakes, I put them back inside. I would not put mealworms outside. It's much easier keeping them indoors, where you can warm the house in winter and cool the space in summertime. So once I corrected those mistakes, it was about building back the strength of the farm. So that meant basically not feeding the chickens for 6 to 9 months, so that I could get as much pupa out of each month to become to become beetles, to populate the beetle container, so that they would then produce more eggs and build the strength of the colony back up. Now I managed to get it to it was basically bursting. I had a huge amount of beetles, they were making a lot of eggs, making a lot of mealworms, to the point where I'm like, if I keep adding beetles to this container, it's going to overpopulate and I'm going to have a problem. So that's when I knew that I was able to adjust from trying to build the colony back up to maintaining its strength, and then just continuing that process from then on. So now I'm at that stage where I've got a strong farm, and I'm able to give surplus mealworms to the chickens, I've got enough pupa to keep the life cycle going. And I think from there it's really just about trying different things and tweaking the system a little bit. If we talk about the container, this is just what I had when I decided to farm mealworms, so I've just used it. But it's not ideal in the sense that it's semi-transparent. Light gets through. So if you can find a container that is, basically got black containers, that's probably a better way. But I've just tried to retrofit this to make it work.
So for the Beetle container, and actually all of the containers, I leave a little gap for good airflow. Otherwise, I think they get starved of oxygen. For the Beetle tray, I put just a bit of cardboard. I just stick it to the side here. Got dark conditions, and I just put over the top a bit of black plastic so that I can keep the drawer open, but it's going to get good airflow in here, while at the same time trying to make it dark. That's just what I've tried. It seems to be working. There's probably other ways, but that's what I do. For the rest of the mealworms, I find that they become a bit more tolerant of the light, and so don't really require that sort of intervention. Anyway, that's what I try and do to deal with the fact that they're semi-transparent containers.
For me, I use carrot as the moisture and bran as the substrate. And when we started, we were buying little 200-gram bags of bran from the supermarket, which were costing like about $2 each. And I remember we were like, we're going to get into this a bit harder. We bought like $130 worth of bran, not realizing that we could go to like a farm supply outlet that sell bran by the 20 kilo bag for $30. And what I do with the bran is I put them in buckets like this. I've got a bunch of these. Freeze the bran for 4 days to kill off anything that might be in the bran, and then it's ready to be put in the farm. But once you've got somewhere to put your mealworms, obviously you buy your mealworms. I started with I think 1 kilo, and that was plenty to get 5 of these going, 5 towers going. And then from there it was about sort of building up the numbers. But the other factor that I stumbled upon is being able to sell some of the elements that come out of a mealworm farm at markets and even online. That can make up the cost of owning the mealworm farm, so that you can either design it so you're either breaking even or even making a profit with them, so that you're essentially then feeding your chickens for free and maybe even making a small profit off it at the same time. Sell Frass at markets, or you could wholesale it to a local nursery that will on-sell it from there.
Sprinkle it around the top, mix it in with your spoon. That's the idea of reusing the spoon all the time, and then just water it in, and you see results in 5 to 7 days. Fantastic stuff.
You could find some people in your local area that have reptiles that could buy some mealworms each month. So there is a way of getting an income from the effort, and essentially get an income from your effort and then get free mealworms for the chickens. What I'll do is I'll go through each stage, month 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This one's empty, and it can be handy to have an empty bin in each tower just for other purposes. But let's go from where you bought your mealworms and you put your 1 kilo of mealworms into one of these bins. The month 4 bin is basically the size of the mealworms you're probably going to get when you buy them. So let's look at this one and then we'll work our way through the system.
So once you get your mealworms, you put your bran in, and what I'd use is egg cartons. And I put 2 in, basically upside down, like so. And I put these little slits in it. It just, I think, just helps a little bit for the mealworms to find their way into the egg carton. And this is where I put the carrot. And I use 2 of them. They've been eating the carrot, so there's not much left actually. I will be feeding them again today after sifting them. But you can see that there are pupa already in this bin. But just to show you how it should look when you first set up your farm. So you put your bran in and put your 2 egg cartons in. and then cover it over. And that's one of the things I do because of my clear containers. This just gives them a darker environment to be in.
What I'm going to do is jump ahead, and I'm going to start with the beetles and work our way through. Then I'll show you how I set up harvesting the pupa, how to care for them becoming beetles, how I introduce the beetles into the beetle bin, and so on and so forth. We'll go through it all. So this is a litre jug. I reckon I put about 7 or 8 litres of bran into the beetle bin as a starting substrate for them. So I put the beetles in this top container.
You see all the beetles in there. What I'm doing now is I've got one egg carton upside down where I put the carrot. The reason I do that is to try as best I can to keep the carrot separate from the bran. Eventually the beetles, when they're moving around, they'll introduce bran into the container, but because it's being maintained frequently, it's not really an issue. That's why I use the egg container. Otherwise, the movement of the beetles, the carrot just drops down into the substrate pretty quickly, and then they have a hard time accessing it. So that's what I do here. But because I've got quite a few beetles in the farm, I was originally doing a similar thing that I do with the mealworms, which was have 2 egg containers. But what I was finding is having another container, the flat part of it here, it was trapping too much moisture underneath the bran. So I'm like, how do I give them enough moisture without having to tend to them every single day, but at the same time not over moisturize the bran, causing problems. So the moment what I'm doing is I'm just using this part of the egg carton and placing it over the top so there's a bit more airflow coming up, and I do put some carrot on the substrate just to try to maximize feeding so that they get enough moisture over a couple of days. And the other reason for that is once the mealworms start to hatch, my thinking is that the carrot that is dropped further down into the substrate, the mealworms might hopefully have access to that moisture without coming up and being potentially attacked by the beetles. So that's the system for the beetles.
The mealworms are going to essentially be 0 days to 4 weeks old when they move down here. So we've got up to 4 weeks, up to 8 weeks, up to 12 weeks, up to 16 weeks, and up to 20 weeks. So after 4 weeks, you separate the beetles from the bran and put another container together with your substrate and put it back in here, put your beetles back in here, and move the substrate with the eggs down into this one. Let me take you through what happens in the 5 to 8 week mealworms.
This was put together just yesterday, so it's brand new, so there may not be much activity in here, but I put 2 egg cartons upside down in here. What that allows me to do is put the carrot in between so that it's sitting on the bran, but it's not going to easily fall through the bran. The reason for this is I find the baby mealworms are a lot more sensitive to light, and they're much more, they're like shy. So this gives them an easy access to the moisture without having to sort of climb into this area. And then just put these egg cartons back over the top just to create more darkness. And I check that maybe the first couple of weeks, so from week 5 to week 6, I might check it every 2 or 3 days because the carrot will eventually dry out and I'll need to replace the carrot. But because I've got so many beetles, will be a lot of eggs and mealworms that will be generated in this bin. And so within a short time, we'll start seeing activity, and they'll start devouring the carrot. But that's how I manage week 5 to week 8. Check it every couple of days, either to replace the carrot or because they've eaten it, or replace it because the carrot's dried out. But you'll know that you've got mealworms because if we move up, so this will be 9 to 12. You can see a very different situation in here. So again, this was just moved up into this area yesterday, so you can see what happens. We've got this carrot here. If I lift that up, hopefully be able to see the mealworms there. So they're a lot more active, and you can start to see the exoskeletons starting to form where they're shedding, and they're quite active now. Move this so you'll see lots of activity. If I move this to a side, you can just see all the mealworms in there. So as they get a bit older, they get a little bit more, I think, less sensitive to the light, and so they start moving out into this area, and so start putting some carrot inside the egg carton. They do start to move around. Between 9 and 10 weeks, you position your carrot roughly like that. And between 11 and 12 weeks, when they're really going through a major growth spurt, you can really increase the carrot to something like that.
It's going to be like a really major growth spurt for them. And if you've got a lot of eggs, this can start getting a little moist in the substrate. It can start to feel heavy. You can start to feel a dampness. If you look at the frass, it will look like a dark grey as opposed to like a light sandy colour. There's two things you can do at that point. The first thing to do, or the first thing I'll do, is just add more bran into the bin. To just adding a dry material seems to help sort of dissipate some of that moisture. That can be a good way to manage that really powerful growing time where a lot of heat's being generated, moisture's being generated. The other thing to do, which is where this empty container can come in handy, is just halve the material at this stage. So from the 9 to 12 week stage, halve the material and have them in 2 bins, just giving them more room, less numbers in each bin to continue along. I did that last month and it did work, but this month I'm just trying to just add more bran, and when I did, I noticed it's a lot drier now and there, not as damp. What you might find also in the 9 to 12 weeks, at the end of, so week 10ish, 11 and 12, you may start, or you should start seeing a pupa in there. If it starts to be a lot, it's probably a good idea to sift the material, get the pupa out, and then just reset the bin. It helps you to get a bit of pupa out before they start to die or the mealworms start to eat them. At week 12, you could sift the frass out of here and just add a little bit of bran if need be, or just leave it and add more bran. But when you bring it up here, so this is, 13 to 16, this is where you're going to get most of your pupa. What you'll probably need to do once or twice within those weeks, you'll probably have to, you will need to sift the pupa out of here to essentially help keep the life cycle going, but also for the health of the farm as well. So this is where you're going to get most of your pupa to keep the life cycle going. So by the time you get to week 16, a lot of the mealworms would have become pupa.
You can see the frass there. So this is what we'll be harvesting today. So 13 to 16, they can be active, but they start to slow down because they're pupating, and they do pupate in waves. They're not as active as they are in at this stage here, weeks 9 to 12. Still plenty of mealworms in here, and here we go, there's a pupa. I will be adding more carrot once we sift all of this today. They start slowing down, so you won't have to feed them as often during this time, but it's just a case of continuing to feed them. I'd maybe put 3 or 4 carrots in each, but you'll start to notice that they're not eating them as much, so you can start to reduce the carrots. But that's all you do, is feed them every couple of days. And when you start to see a bunch of pupa on top of the substrate, that's a good time to do a quick sift substrate and get the pupa out. Once they're at week 17 to 20, we move them up here. Frass has been taken out, or the pupa's been taken out. It's ready to feed to the chickens over the next couple of weeks. You would just keep a minimal amount of bran in here just to reduce the amount of sifting to get the mealworms out to feed your chickens. This little bird just wants my mealworms. But let me take you through what I've found is the best way to separate the bran from the beetles so that you can have a fresh new beetle bin for the mealworm farm. So I'm going to take you through each step. The first thing you'll do is you'll notice that there'll be live beetles on the tops of these egg cartons. And what you do is you just bring them over to a separate container and just sort of flip them out. So this will be your live beetle container. Once you do that, you get all the egg containers out, so you've just got your bran and the carrots and everything, and the next step is to sift. Now what you can do is pour about half of the substrate, and it will have Frass in it as well, into your sifting system. Now this is the we bought a 9-tier system, but you only need the first 6. So pour the bran into here. The first thing that's going to happen, so you just start shaking it. First thing that's going to come is the carrot. Separate the old dry carrot, chuck it out. Carrot that's fresher, put it to one side. But once you've done that, this should have, they might have a few little beetles, live beetles on it. They can hold on to the mesh. Put it in your live beetle tray. They want all the bran to go through the first 3. That can be a little tricky sometimes. The bran can get clogged in between. What I would do, let's say I sift this one, and there's a lot of bran in this sieve. What you can do while you're shaking is just lift this slightly, just to give a little bit of space, and that just helps the bran get through. You get the bran through this one, and you will have live beetles in this tray. So what you can do is put your live beetles that are on this tray into your live beetle container. Put that to one side. Now this will have beetles and some bran in it, so do your best to try and get as much of the bran out of here as you can. But the beetles can't get through sieve number 3, so this is going to have just bran in it. Bran and obviously your eggs. What you do is you get another container and just pour the bran out into that container, because you'll use that later, so that you've got an empty tray and a tray with beetles in it, a sieve with beetles in it, I should say. And you're going to use these to separate the dead from the live beetles, because what happens is beetles cling to the sieve. So the way to do that, you've got beetles in here, you've got nothing in here yet. You just flip it around at about that speed, and you'll have only live beetles for the most part. Hung to this, and then hold this and just tap them out. So you've got more and more live beetles being separated. There'll still be live beetles here and dead beetles. Swap it out and do the same thing. You have live beetles in here, tap them out. Then you'll have your remaining beetles in here, swap it over, and you just do this maybe 6, 7, 8 times, and eventually you'll be getting like 5 live beetles in a sieve to tap out, sort of consistently. When you get to that point, you're going to have a few live beetles and lots of dead beetles in your sieves. At that point, there just comes a point where it's time to stop and put the remaining mealworms, both some alive and mostly dead, into another tray of basically your dead beetles. The reason for this is you could spend a couple of hours getting every live beetle out of your system, and it's just not worth your time and energy. What I used to do is I would put live and dead beetles into a container and put the egg containers on top, and wait for the mealworms to climb up into the egg carton and tap them out into a live beetle container. But because there's so many dead ones, eventually the live ones just hang out in the darkness of the dead beetles and it's just a nightmare getting them out. Probably save
a couple of hours worth of work, and it's just a much easier system. So just keep flicking and tapping them out until you're done, and then do it again because you've done half of the substrate, so you'll do the second half. The second half's a little easier, or it's got a lot of frass in it, so do it a second time. Once you've sifted the bran through these 4, they'll be set aside. Put all of the bran in that other container from this sieve and this sieve. So you get all your bran out that's just been filtering through the sifting process, and you'll be left with the finest material in here, which will probably have a lot of your eggs in it. What I do is, because this is the finer material, I then put this back into the empty container, the original one, because it's that finer material that sort of sinks to the bottom. So just put it in the bottom, and then all of the bran that you've sifted, that you've been putting in a separate container, put that back in to that original container. So now you've got all the bran with the eggs and baby mealworms are back into the original container, and then you put your 2 egg containers upside down with the carrot in it, and then you put it down into this container. And then what you would do is you get an empty container, put your 7 to 8 litres of bran into the container, and like I said, you put 1 egg carton upside down for the carrot, 1 without a bottom, without a flat bottom on it, so that you've got more aeration. Put a couple of carrots on there, and then you've got a fresh Beetle container for the next month. 670 grams. You need to do some maths. Okay, 167 grams for each farm. So we're starting week 17 and starting week 13 in these 2 bins. And at that point, so the end of week 12 and the end of week 16, good time to sift these 2 containers. So we'll just get the oldest one first. So you just have your mealworms hanging around, so just give them a tap. You can either pull some of the carrot out manually. Gave them these not that long ago. You just put them aside into a separate container. You just tip the remaining out. At this point, your mask. So you just get all the material out. Now this egg container, it's basically done. So I would just compost that, and that'll go in the compost. You're left with your mealworms, your pupa. There's a few ways you can do it, but I like to put the pupa separator on the second sieve and then put the largest sieve on top. This will get the carrots out, and then you'll start getting your pupa here. There's a lot of frass in this that'll end up in the bottom bucket. So like I was saying, it can get clogged up quickly, so you just lift the sieve and that helps it get through. You'll always find some old carrot that's dried out completely, and that just goes in the compost. Once your sieve's empty, put it to one side, and here will be your mealworms and pupa. So just give it a gentle sieve. Encourage the mealworms to go through the holes, and while I wait for that, I just get little bits of old carrot that don't need to be in there. Once you think you've got pretty much all the mealworms out, I just put a container straight underneath and just tip the pupa out. Put that to one side. Get another container and put the mealworms. Now what can happen, the mealworms at a certain size can get stuck in the sieve. You can just sort of give it a light rub like that. It sort of encourages them to go through.
One other thing you can do to avoid that is in the next sifting process, we won't put this tray in so that these mealworms don't get stuck in it. And you'll save yourself a headache. Okay, here you've got some of the smaller mealworms and some bran and exoskeletons. So what I sometimes do is put this one into a separate container again. The idea being I could actually put these smaller mealworms into a younger bin, like the next bin down, so that they can continue to grow. So put that to one side. Again, get another container, put your bran in. Now you can actually leave that there because it's annoying taking it off the bucket, and you can empty that later. I think it was sieve number 4, so we've taken that out. Continue to sift our material. I'm just going to put all of that in. Again, we've got our pupa container, mealworm container. And now I probably have overfilled this thing. Because it's so full, it's hard to get movement deeper down for the frass to go through. So what I do when this happens is I just empty about half of the material out, and that way it can be sifted a lot easier. Now when I've got some bran and a couple of mealworms, I'll just put that in the bran container, and on this occasion I'll empty this last one, this last sieve. So just put the last 2 sieves on, because we put the remainder of our material that we had to take out because it was too full. The last sieve, a bit of a shake around. So let me show you what we've got now. This is our frass, which is about an inch or 2 deep. We've got our bran that we'll just reuse. We've got our pupa that we'll put in our pupa containers to turn into beetles. And we've got our mealworms, which in this case will be fed to our chickens. This is the original container that we just sifted. So what you do is you just put the old bran back in. If you're not planning to feed the mealworms to your chickens straight away, that's probably enough bran. Now what I have been doing is I weigh my mealworms just to see what I'm getting out of each container. Okay, I thought I was recording and I wasn't, but I put the mealworms back in this container. There's 360 grams worth of mealworms. I put only 1 egg container back in. There's no point having 2 egg containers. Put some carrot in so that there's some moisture, and then you just put it back into your wings. Okay, I've just sifted the first 3-month-old mealworm farm, and just a few things to show you. You'll probably see the exoskeletons forming on the top. It's a good opportunity to clear them out because they do add moisture. So the other thing I wanted to show you is even though we started like 7 or 8 litres of bran, by the end of the 3rd month, this is all the bran that we have left. Maybe a centimetre along the bottom, whereas it used to be, we started when it was like up here. So that the rest is frass that has gone, that has come out. So it's important to top this up before putting these mealworms back in, because they'll be in there for at least another month to 6 weeks. Okay, so for these 3-month-old mealworms, we need to add some more bran. Let's see how many litres. I'm thinking about 3 maybe. Let's make it 4. So 4 litres, just to get them through the next 4 to 6 weeks. Once you've vacuumed all the exoskeletons, did a really good source for composting. All the old carrot, all the dried up carrot, as well as the egg cartons that are just beyond use, all go in the compost. Alright, so that covers how to swap out the beetles into a new bin, and also how to take care of the sifting of these bins, and just generally how to maintain it throughout the month. But let's look at finally how we care for the pupa and how we harvest the beetles out of the pupa bins, top up the beetles. So as the beetles die, we want to replace them with fresh beetles. So this is where I put all the pupa when they come out. Definitely every 2 days, but sometimes every day, depending on how many beetles you're getting. It's good to harvest the beetles you can out of here and then put them in your mealworm farm. If you leave it too long and the beetles start to mature, they're not as easy to remove out of the bins, and I'll show you that. I just use paper towel. There's nothing on this one, so we've just only got the one here. When you find one, you just put it in a container. Got a couple here. So that as they get darker, that means they're a bit more mature. Now, there are beetles in here. What you can do is you also can put paper towel underneath. Roll that off, and as you can see, there's a bunch here. This is what you have to do if they've matured a bit. And I just use just a bit of cardboard to pick up beetles if I need to. But if we lift this one off, there should be some beetles here too. Here we go. So this is what keeps the farm going long term. And I've found so far that there's a lot of pupa that don't make it. They just die, they just go dark, and they don't become beetles. I don't worry about that. I find that there's more than enough beetles that are coming through that die-off rate of the pupa is not an issue. So there are some beetles in here, but once you start getting a really strong farm, you don't have to get every beetle out. You don't have to get every pupa out. You can save yourself a lot of time by just sacrificing a few here and there. So I'm gonna feed that to the chickens and then give this a clean out, and then it's available for the next lot of pupa. So I've got about 210 grams of the old pupa. There you go. And these beetles will go back into the mealworm farm. Because I've got 5 mealworm towers, I divide any beetles that I do collect in by 5 and put that amount of beetles into each farm. Now we've got some of the pupa that we harvested today. That's not all of it. That will go in this top tray. So what I do is I just put down some fresh paper towel first, and we just put the pupa down. And just sort of give it they'll move around, find their own place, but just give it a bit of a move around, and then I place some on top. What happens is the fresh beetles that emerge, they cling to the underside. So you just lift these top layers off and put them into a container. I've got 5 of those towers, so I've just sifted all 5 bins of mealworms that have just hit 4 months old, so they're now going into their 5th month, and they're the ones that I'll feed to the chickens. And there's 1,880 grams or 1.8 kilos or nearly 1.9 kilos worth of mealworms that could essentially go right now to the chickens. And there was 580 grams worth of pupa that will help continue the life cycles. That's a ton of pupa. All right, here's the frass that we've harvested today. That was from the 4-month-old mealworms, and this is the 3-month-old mealworms. So let's weigh them and see how much we got. So 5.84, 5.79, almost identical. Okay, so we've got 11.63 kilos of frass for the month. So that's just ideal fertilizer for the garden that we'll use. It's hard to say, but roughly speaking, we might use half of it, use 1 bucket in the garden and sell 1 bucket. But it is important to freeze it first, so we'll put them both in the freezer for 4 days, just to make sure that if there are any eggs or any other insect eggs or anything that shouldn't be in there is killed off, so it's just pure frass.
I should mention that having mealworms is actually a lot bigger job than I think a lot of people anticipate. I think the idea overrides like the practicalities of people's circumstances. Certainly was the case for me. I sort of watched some videos and then I bought some mealworms and then just sort of followed my nose kind of thing, trying to figure it out. And as you go along, you realize to really keep them properly, to keep them so that they're not a pain in the neck, it actually requires, if not daily, every other day, you need to be doing something with them. So it's not for everybody. Because we're running like an urban homestead, and our idea is to try and maximize as many elements as we can on the property to like make an income off the property and have some feedback loops within the property in regards to biomass. I've wanted to make this work, and I think I've pretty much got it right so that it's it's work, but it's not as much of a headache. Again, it's not for everybody. I think a lot of people want to set and forget, and the moment you forget, the system starts to go down. But with just a little bit of maintenance, as well as like a monthly sifting of the frass and swapping out the beetles, yeah, you can have a pretty decent system.